Hey there, Donovan. I'm a retired park ranger, and I used to work at a very well-known national park. I can't say the exact park, but every one of your listeners would know the park if I said it. Anyways, this isn't a long story, but I can tell you that there is indeed something going on in the deep woods that is being covered up and not talked about. I've had a dozen of these incidents occur over my time as a park ranger. When I say a dozen, I mean a dozen that I was involved with to some degree, either speaking with authorities or being directly involved myself. I can't count how many times I've had visitors report strange and weird encounters. The dozen incidents that I've been involved with all end the same way. Someone at the park has a close encounter with said creature, then we blame it on a grizzly bear or some other wild animal. Now, if someone gets hurt or if something gets destroyed, it's pretty much the same thing if it can be explained. There are some times, though, where you can't explain or pass it off as an animal attack. That's when the authorities get involved. And we've been told to keep our mouths shut, and then we go through a cover-up process. I've been involved with coordinating some cleanup efforts with authorities. Now, when I say authorities, I mean the higher-ups in the government that don't want you to know what's really going on out there. There is no agency like the FBI or CIA involved. These people don't wear any identifying information that ties them to an agency. Are they some special part of the FBI or Homeland Security? Sure, maybe, but I wouldn't know and they would never speak of it. They just give instructions and tell us what to do and what not to do, and that's the end of it. There is no other way. At least if you want to remain employed and not have your entire life turned upside down. I can't get into the specifics of each case, but what I can tell you is that there are certain creatures out there that defy logic, that defy our understanding as human beings, that are roaming around in national parks. Are they from another dimension? Are they created by the very government that is trying to cover up and hide their existence? Are they fallen angels? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but one thing is for sure. They exist, and I've been personally involved with multiple cases of covering up their existence. I've even seen them myself. Not all of what I've been told, but several of them I've seen on multiple occasions. It is truly terrifying if you've ever experienced this, and I pray that none of your listeners is ever in that situation. Because I've had plenty of nightmares and sleepless nights because of what I know and what I've seen. Keep fighting the good fight, and thanks for doing what you're doing. As a park ranger, I've had quite a few experiences that have made me question everything that I know. We're not alone out there, and there is life after death. I could go on and on about every experience I've had. But I'll tell you about a recent one that seriously wigged me out. I was instructed to remove this invasive plant species that was wreaking havoc on our native foliage. I was deep in the woods digging up the roots of this damn weed when I heard this loud cry in the distance. Hearing animal noises isn't uncommon, so I didn't pay it much mind at first. But the more I heard it, the more it sounded like a wounded puppy crying out for help. It got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I just had to rescue this poor little puppy. I kept hiking in the direction I heard the cries. It took me far into the forest off the paths that I'm familiar with, and I kept walking deep into the woods towards the sound. I eventually wandered into a Wanichi camp, and I started asking if there was a wounded animal around. Nobody knew of any, so I just kept searching. Finally, a man asked me what it sounded like, and I said it sounded like a wounded puppy. I explained to him that I'd been searching for well over an hour, and it sounds like the puppy is just around the corner, but I can't find it anywhere. He had me sit down and gave me this delicious concoction to drink. He told me that the sound I was hearing was not a dog. It was a sound that he had heard several times before. He told me that several years earlier, a boy had drowned in a lake nearby. Ever since then, his ghost has haunted that lake and has become a deathly presence. Once an innocent boy crying for help now cries to lure people to him. When people reach out to him to get him out to the lake, The boy grabs them by their legs and pulls them underwater to drown them to death. Being skeptical, I explained to the man that it wasn't a boy's cry that I heard. It was a wounded puppy crying for help. The man was persistent, and he insisted that I should never trust the boy. He said that everyone who has ever gone to the lake to help the boy has died, and if he was calling to me, that meant I was next. I didn't believe it for a second. I was getting frustrated by this point. I just went way out of my way to help an animal, and it wasn't about to be in vain. Suddenly, I heard the cry again. "See? That's the sound I've been hearing," I shouted. The man just shook his head. "I've heard that cry many times before. I've lost several people to that cry. All I can do is warn you. It's up to you to do what's best for you." And then the man walked away, and I was left with a choice. Do I listen to some fairy tale and let a helpless animal die, or do I go rescue it and get back to dealing with the weeds? I followed the cry for another 15 minutes or so, and sure enough, I ended up at a lake. It was gorgeous, located right in between two mountains. There are some incredible sights at Yosemite National Park, but this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. There were trees surrounding the lake and endless mountain views as far as the eye could see in every direction. Finally, I heard the cry crystal clear, but this time it sounded different. There was a strange element to the cry. It was almost like whatever was crying was trying to hold back laughter. I looked around and there wasn't any creature that I could see. The sound kept getting louder and louder. I thought about everything the man had said, and the sound I heard wasn't a cry for help, but clearly something toying with me, something evil. I turned around and started running. I could still hear their laughter in the distance as I ran back towards a Wanichi camp. I finally made it, and I told the man I spoke to earlier everything that had happened. He told me if you hear the cry again, ignore it, and do whatever you can to get it out of your mind. The boy preys on your compassion and fear if you let him. He will drive you to drown in the lake just to escape the torment in your mind. I told a fellow park ranger about this, and he told me of a legend called the Grouse Lake Ghost. People hear his cries and end up drowning in the lake. This freaked me out that it was a known phenomenon, and I thought about how close I got to the lake. I must say the lake is absolutely gorgeous, and it's something everyone should see before they die. But for God's sake, if you hear crying or laughing, get the hell out of there. Has anyone else ever experienced this? Or has anyone else ever heard of the Grouse Lake Ghost? Thanks for reading my story. Every summer I go to a new place and spend time away from everybody. It helps me get my bearings before I get overwhelmed by the constant pressure. Since I started teaching years ago, I've realized you've got to grab time for yourself whenever you can. I try to treat myself to a hike after school when I can. The kids are great and I wouldn't have it any other way, but they are relentless. The drama of 30 kids stuck in a classroom is hard to imagine if you haven't been there. When the school year ends, I'm so wrung out that I go home and can't move for quite a while. I usually let myself be a total sloth and hope I come out of it soon. And I have to, obviously. There's no choice but to use the downtime to work on everything that's fallen apart at the house. There's no time to deal with it during the school year. It takes me a month to feel like I've put things in order enough to look around a bit. That means it's usually the beginning of August before I start planning a trip. This time I wanted to see the redwoods. I had been around them a bit when I was a teenager, but I always wanted to go back. I wanted to camp right in the middle of them. This was when the internet was just getting going, so it was a lot harder to plan your trip details. I found a spot that I liked, Jedediah Smith State Park. It's close to the California-Oregon border. There were no Google Maps back then, but I figured there was something better than my paper maps. I got on my computer and I think I got MapQuest or something. I plugged in the starting point and the destination. I got these line-by-line written instructions. It was a lot. I printed it out and had several pages of directions. I didn't even have to read through them. I guess I figured the map robots must know what they're talking about. By then, it was around my birthday, August 5th. So I had 2 weeks to get out and back and be ready for school. I got my camper gear thrown together and tossed it all in my Jeep. It was a pretty unorganized trip since I left so late, but I was glad to get out of there and on the road. I took my pages of unread directions and headed out. Everything was going fine until I got to Winnemucca. I was traveling on the usual highways, very straightforward. I stopped at some cafe and got something to eat. I went in and ate in my Jeep and started looking over my directions. I had reached some kind of crossroads, and the instructions had me leaving the main highway and getting on an old state highway. I trusted the maps and got back behind the wheel. I was on a 2-lane road and huge trucks were passing by going like 80 miles an hour. It was close to midnight and pitch black since the street lamps had disappeared. Still okay, but then I was randomly instructed to turn onto a dirt road. I started questioning my sanity because this road didn't seem like it led anywhere people wanted to go. I was really naive then and just kept going. After about 20 miles of dusty bumping along, all this strange wildlife started to appear. These big birds kept swooping in front of my car. They were beige in color. They looked about a foot long. I thought birds slept at night. Then all these giant jackrabbits started appearing. There were dozens of them, so tall and jumping in front of my car. I had to keep slamming on my brakes. They didn't seem to have any regard for vehicles at all. I think I hit one of them, but there was no way I was stopping. I saw some kind of animals with horns. I don't know what they were. I kept catching glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye. And some other animal kept shrieking. I was surrounded by the most surreal wildlife. I had to go pretty slow because of the potholes. I came to a spot with such a deep hole that I couldn't drive through it, so I turned into a field to go around. Out of nowhere, something descended out of the sky with this blinding blue light and hovered about 100 feet in the air. I stopped at my tracks and realized that it was totally silent. My high beams were on, and in front of me were these carcasses laid in a circle, a real variety of them. And in the middle of the circle, more carcasses laid in an X, like X marks the spot. The blue light seemed like a searchlight shining around, but it stopped when it landed on the X. The carcasses around the ground started quivering like they were vibrating. And out of each one rose a pale, wispy form, and they all got drawn up into the light towards the aircraft. I don't know what to call it but an aircraft. It was triangular in shape. After that, the carcasses became still again, and the blue light disappeared. The whole time, everything had been completely silent. As soon as it was gone, I hightailed it out of there as best as I could, and all the crazy wildlife reappeared. I really wanted to know if anyone else has reported something like that. I still can't wrap my mind around it. And apparently, in those days at least, MapQuest always gave you the shortest route possible as the crow flies. I never follow directions like that anymore. We hear a lot of stories up in these woods, and I never believed them until this past year. See, I live up in Baudette, Minnesota. It's up on the Canadian border near the Lake of the Woods. There's Pine Island State Forest just south of town, and Rainy River to the north. That's also the Canadian border. Because of the river, it's the walleye capital of the world, home of Willie the Walleye. The point is, there's not much up here except the town. You go south into Minnesota, and there's nothing until Red Lake. It's woods mostly. In winter, it's cold, like to the point where you have to plug in your car at night if you want to start it in the morning. I travel a lot by snowmobile in the winter. It's just easier. Baudette's got about 1,000 people, which is about 1,000 people too many for me. So I got me a house on the edge of town. My buddy Derek, he lives even further out, not even in the city limits. People say Derek's crazy, but me, I just think he sees things other people don't see, you know? He pays attention. He doesn't have a smartphone or anything like that. He watches things in the woods. One day last winter, I went out to see him because my grandma said my deer meat was taking up too much room in her freezer. I figured I'd bring some to him and we'd have a couple drinks and hang out for a while. So I took the snowmobile because I can take a shortcut through the woods that way, and I don't have to worry about whether or not the county plowed Derek's street. I set out later than I meant to, because of course Grandma wanted me to shovel the walk first. It was December and it gets dark around 4 o'clock. When I finally got all the meat loaded on the snowmobile, The trees were already making long shadows on the snow. I almost didn't go, but if I tried to go the next day, she'd do the same thing. I got on the snowmobile and put my helmet on, and hit the path through the woods. The light lit up the trail pretty good, but I still took it slow. You never know when a deer might run out in front of you, and that could be the end of you. So as I'm going, I'm just watching the trees go by, when something did jump out on the trail. But jump isn't the right word. That thing strolled. It was a good 20 or 30 feet in front of me, but my snowmobile light lit it up real good. Still, I couldn't believe what I saw. It must have been 9 feet tall. I mean, I could see it was tall as one of those pine trees. At first, I thought it must be some kid messing around with me because nothing has antlers and stands on 2 feet. But this was no kid with a costume. It had a skull for a face. I got one look into those empty eye sockets, and I almost fell off my snowmobile. I never remember being that scared. But just when I was trying to decide if I should turn around or not, it disappeared. It didn't walk away, it was just gone. So of course, I wondered if it was ever there at all. Maybe I just imagined it. I thought I saw it, but once it was gone, I had my doubts. I told myself it was a weird hallucination and just kept going. But when I got to the spot where it was, it smelled like something rotten. Like when hamburger meat goes bad in the fridge, except worse. Much worse. It only lasted for a second though. So I just told myself I was imagining things again. I blew past that spot and kept going to Derek's house. Like I said, his house is basically in the woods. He's got a dish on the side for TV and a bunch of wood piled up on the side for his fireplace. That's the only heat he's got. I just leave my jacket on when I go inside. Once I went in, we had a few drinks and I started explaining what I experienced. He told me that's a Wendigo. Now I've heard a few stories about this thing, but I don't know what to believe, so I asked him. He said that all he knew is it was wandering around the woods, and it was quiet as death. He'd seen it out of his window a few times, but it never came close to the house, because he made a circle of salt around it. Salt keeps all kinds of evil away, he said. So he said he figured it was worth a try. I ended up spending the night at Derek's house and left in the morning to go home. I didn't see anything on the way home, though I did smell that rotten meat when I passed through that spot. I tell you what, when I got home, I got out that rock salt I use on the sidewalk, and I made a circle all the way around the house. Now, I've never seen that outside of my house, and I've been back to Derek several times, but I've never seen it again. Let me know what you think about these stories in the comments below. And also check out Lilith Dread. She releases almost every single day. Thanks and take care.